Hi, I'm Dan Twining. I'm president of the International Republican Institute, and we're just really delighted to welcome you today for a conversation with Secretary Elaine Chao. This is being hosted by our Women's Democracy Network in collaboration with our friends at the Hudson Institute. Established in 2006, IRI's Women's Democracy Network empowers women around the world to participate in the political process and pursue leadership roles in government, political parties, and civil society. The WDN connects aspiring and accomplished women leaders all over the world, creating forums for sharing ideas and experiences, as well as providing technical training and resource materials. And we're just very pleased and proud that we're celebrating the Women's Democracy Network's 15th anniversary this year. It's just an extraordinary network of amazing women leaders from all over the world. We'll be highlighting several accomplished women leaders in a series of fireside chats, even though it's 90 degrees outside today in Washington, D.C., so that they can share their personal and professional journeys with our network members. And so it's really just a pleasure for me to introduce WDN Advisory Council member and chair of the board of the Hudson Institute, our friend Sarah May Stern, to moderate our conversation today with Secretary Chao. Thank you. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Dan. It's my very great honor to be part of WDN, and an even greater honor to be able to introduce Secretary Chao. I have to tell you a personal story. Back in the mid-'80s, Secretary Chao's little sister, May, and I were at graduate school together. She said to me, "Watch my big sister, Elaine. She's going places." And boy, has she gone places. I'm going to give you a quick bio before I start talking to her, and it's pretty amazing. Most recently, Secretary Chao served as U.S. Secretary of Transportation in the last administration. Before that, she also served in George W. Bush's cabinet as Secretary of Labor, where she had all sorts of accomplishments that I hope she will tell us about a little later. Before joining the cabinets, she worked in the not-for-profit sector. She was president and CEO of United Way, one of America's largest charities doing all sorts of good work. She also was president of the Peace Corps. She went to Mount Holyoke and also got an MBA from HBS. And after that, she was in the private sector in the banking and maritime industries. So her career has spanned all three segments. Secretary Chao, you came here as an 8-year-old, literally fresh off the boat, not speaking any English, and ended up as maybe the most powerful woman in America. Pretty amazing. I don't know how you did it. Will you tell us?
Well, I've been very blessed. I've been very blessed to have wonderful parents who empowered their 6 daughters. I'm one of 6 daughters. They imbued within their daughters a tremendous sense of the world of possibilities. I give my parents a great deal of credit. They didn't know what opportunities would exist in America. They came here on blind faith, but they knew that this country would give their daughters greater opportunities than where we had been before. So I immigrated here as a 8-year-old from Asia, and the rest is history. This is a wonderful country, and it is made possible by the freedoms and democratic institutions that we have in this country.
Okay, but tell us some specifics. You were 8-year-old.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You didn't speak any. I agree with you. We have incredible opportunity in this country.
Okay, so
but you seized that opportunity. What'd you do?
Well, my parents are Americans of Chinese descent. My mother came from Anhui province. My father came from Shanghai, and they met and they were high school sweethearts. And then when the Civil War occurred, they made their separate ways to Taiwan, where my father became the youngest sea captain at the age of 29. But life was tough on the seas. So he took a national examination, scored #1, broke all the records, and had a chance to come to America. My mother was 7 months pregnant at the time with their third child. And it took my father 3 years before he was able to bring my 2 sisters and me to America. And he saw his third child for the first time when she was 3 years old. So we came amidst very difficult circumstances. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. My father had 3 jobs to make ends meet. I was thrown into 3rd grade, not knowing how to speak English. It was total immersion. But young kids are resilient. And after a year and a half, I picked up English. But kids were mean. They made fun of us because we weren't dressed very well. We wore hand-me-downs. And in the playgrounds, kids made fun of our inability to speak English. But once again, I think if children come from a secure, loving environment, that adversities don't affect them as much. We knew that we were not wealthy, but we never thought that we were disadvantaged. We had the love and support of our parents. We had hope for the future, and we were just confident that the future would be brighter. And so when you have that hope, you're able to succumb the indignities of the moment or the adversities of the present. And that's what happened with us. So we learned a lot of things. Chinese don't eat meat, huge chunks of meat placed, between bread. Chinese food is a lot of vegetables, a lot of cut up meat. And then to come to America and have to eat like hamburgers, hot dogs and pizza. I mean, who the heck knew about pizza? We thought we were coming to America, and here we are eating Italian food. So we had a lot to learn about America. But it was through the kindness of our church family that we learned about America. And during the weekends, my father and my mother were so energetic. They would take us to all the free sightseeing places within New York City. So if we can't pay because we didn't have any money. So we would go to like the museums, the Museum of Natural History, Empire State Building, Statue of Liberty, all the botanical gardens, the beaches. And in that way, we learned how to maneuver the New York City subways because we didn't have a car. We just used the subways. And my father and mother taught us about America in that way. I'll tell you another story. I had a sister, daughter number 3. We had spent, I remember this as if it were yesterday, we spent a wonderful summer day in Central Park. And at the end of the day, we tiredly made our way home. And my sister began to develop a nosebleed that would not stop. So my parents called emergency services 911 and sent her to the hospital. And she was there for 4 days. And my mother would make these Chinese meals for her third daughter, and she would lug them on a 2.5-hour trek. She would get on the bus, then get on the subway, then get on the bus again, and then walk for nearly 3/4 of a mile, loaded with Chinese food to give to her third daughter who is recuperating in the hospital. Well, once we got more assimilated and we got a car, we found out that our apartment was only 20 minutes away from the hospital. So this is the kind of difficulties that immigrants go through in trying to acclimate to a new country, to a new culture, to a new unfamiliar place. So I will always remember the feelings of vulnerability and how frightened we were. And as a number 1 daughter, I often wondered whether I would ever find my place in America. And I was so worried that I wouldn't find a job, that I wouldn't be able to take care of my family, and that I'd be out in the streets. So looking back, that seems so silly, but these are the kinds of vulnerabilities and anxieties and fears that many newcomers come and experience in a new environment. And I'm glad I went through that because it made me stronger. It made me more empathetic as a leader.
And it also probably enabled you, watching your mother and your father, to work hard and accomplish so much. What if,
That was kind of given, it was taken for granted. I think there is one thing, the Asian American culture really emphasizes hard work. And I think that was very helpful. Anything worthwhile, bare minimum is hard work. And then beyond that, it's energy, it's new ideas, especially in this country. This country has lots of opportunities, but it is also a very competitive country where lots of people have lots of ideas, and having focus, determination, and perseverance helps to reach one's goals.
so what of all you've accomplished, and there are many, many accomplishments in your storied career, which accomplishments are you most proud of?
I never started out thinking that I was going to be a success or accomplish certain things. I only wanted to make my family proud, to be a credit to my community, and to serve my country. So what I'm most proud of at this age are the treasures, the real treasures of life. And that is, I hope I've been a good daughter, I've been a good sister, I've been a good wife, I've had positive impact in improving our country, and I feel very privileged to have been able to serve my country.
Well, you certainly have, but I'm going to push you a little bit on that.
Okay.
Come up with one or two specifics that actually have served your country that you can point to with pride.
Oh, I think it goes way back. At every single job, you don't advance unless you've made real contributions. So when I was a White House fellow, that was my first foray into government. I didn't know so much, but I learned a great deal. And I think people are on the lookout for talent. And if you are talented, you're willing to work, you will find opportunity, at least in America. So when I was I was a White House fellow, I was working at the White House, learned a great deal. I worked on transportation and trade issues. And then I was made Deputy Assistant Secretary level at the Department of Transportation by Elizabeth Dole, my first boss in Washington, female boss. And then during these times, I'm learning. And then I have my real kind of managerial job as chairman of the Federal Maritime Commission. And we completed their review of the 1984 Shipping Act, in which we stopped rebates and unfair treatment and behavior on the seas toward American carriers. And then when I was deputy secretary, I was very much involved in handling a lot of the disaster relief efforts with Hurricane Hugo, Exxon Valdez, and also I was the first United States official to go to Lockerbie, Scotland after the crash of Pan Am 103. And I remember what it was like, and I was trying to obviously advocate for US citizens and the loved ones of those who had perished on that flight. And then I became Peace Corps director, and we started the first Peace Corps programs in the former Soviet Union after its collapse. And we helped the peoples of the former Soviet Union in their newly independent states latch on to a private sector existence so that they can join the ranks of industrialized nations. And then from there, I was recruited to go on to be the CEO of United Way of America, the #1 charity, private sector charity in America. And I was recruited because the previous president had been terminated due to financial mismanagement. And so I came in, I cut my own salary, I sacrificed all benefits, and we saw the resurrection of the United Way movement and the restoration of contributions by donors back to $3.2 billion. And then I was, selected to be the Secretary of Labor, and we had the best record up to that time of health and safety workplace records. ever. And then after that, I joined the Hudson Institute, came and joined Hudson. And that was a very valuable time because, when you're in public office, you are expending energy all the time. So being at a Hudson gave me time to recuperate, to replenish, recharge the batteries, so to speak. And then I was selected as Secretary of Transportation. And if I had to think about what transportation, we've done so much. My 3 themes in transportation was 1, safety. Safety must always be number 1. Number 2, we invested over $330 billion in infrastructure. And number 3, we prepared for the transportation of the future, meaning we engaged with new emerging technologies such as autonomous vehicles, drones, Hyperloop, high-speed rail, commercial space. So we were regulators, and we had to regulate in a way that addressed legitimate public concerns about safety, security, and privacy without hampering innovation. So that in a nutshell is pretty much it.
Pretty much it. Quite a few accomplishments there. So you've told us a little bit about challenges you faced as a new immigrant. What do you think was a big challenge you faced in one of your workplaces?
I think the role of women has changed so much. When I was starting out, I was very often the only female, the only Asian American, and probably the youngest person in all these meetings. And when I was Deputy Secretary of Transportation, I was the only female around that conference room table. And at the time, I didn't think anything. I mean, I knew I felt lonely, and I knew that I was different. So for example, every staff meeting at 8:30 in the morning, the guys would talk about sports, and they would talk about football, they would talk about baseball, whatever the season sports was. And I couldn't keep the Chicago Bears and the Chicago Cubs, straight. So I didn't understand any of that. And then when I became a manager myself, as my first real one was like director of the Peace Corps. Well, I recruited a lot of women so that 50% of the senior management team was women, and the conversation shifted. It was no longer about football or sports or baseball. It was about, and I don't want to go stereotypical, but we would talk about, our families, what we did on the weekends, what shoes we liked, where we went shopping, where we, things like that. So clearly it was very, very different. And when I was Secretary of Labor, I once again had parity in the leadership team. And this was very poignant because I went to visit Iraq in 2004. And I visited a Women's Democracy Center. I went to Hala, which was right outside of Baghdad. And I brought with me a pre-prepared picture frame that showed all of the women leaders of the Department of Labor. So that when I visited the Ministry of Labor, I presented this framed photograph with all these different pictures of women leaders at the US Department of Labor. And I said, this is my management team. And I hope that this gives you inspiration as you construct a new nation in recruiting new leaders for your ministry. So it was very poignant at that time. So I think as women's roles changed, I think women's attitudes changed. I think the women my age were willing to take on, were willing to absorb so much more that was uncomplimentary. And I don't think young women are willing to take it anymore. I think young women these days are much more assertive. They're much less prone to just suffering the indignities. So number one, the role of women has changed. And then secondly, the ideas are important, but as important as the ideas are, what is more important is how to manage people. The policy stuff, as difficult as it is, does not rival the challenges of building consensus among a diverse group of people. So what I tell myself, is that in my leadership role, I have to like everybody, whether I do or not. My job is to get along with everybody. My job is to like everybody, because I think people can sense whether you like them or not, whether you respect them or not. And it's important to show respect and also, congeniality with people that you work with. And then number three, I think in this social media communications world that we have in America, where there's such, an array of different voices, it's very hard to break through the clutter. So I communicate all the time, and I communicate the same message again and again and again, because I never assume that people understand or heard my message. This is a very competitive country. There's so many voices in the public square. And so we have to hone our message and repeat it often. And I think those are the big challenges. And then also finding good people to work with. That's very important. Again, is tied back to building consensus. You need a good leadership team to be able to carry out a mission. And I do not demand loyalty. I feel that loyalty is something that I have to earn. So whenever I've had to construct a team, I have constructed the best team of the most competent people. And then beyond that, then it's my job as a leader to build a team that will work together.
Great advice. I want to go back to your point number 2, where you said you needed to like everybody. As the leader, you're on your team and you were going to like them.
Or people who are not on my team. There are lots of people that I work with, that I interact with, that I may not necessarily enjoy being with, but that's besides the question. But please go ahead.
Well, so if you're not the leader, if you're working your way up the ladder, is it important that that the other people feel that you like them?
I think it is, because even with people who are technologically proficient, it's people who make things happen. And it's important to get along with other people. You may not like them, but you have to get along with them. And this is people inside the organization and people outside the organization. And more, we are in a populist society. So the hierarchies are being flattened. It used to be, you would just please the boss, because the boss had unilateral authority on rewards, performance evaluations. No longer, at least in America, what your peers think about you is just as important as what the boss thinks about you. So it's called the 360-degree evaluation process. And you have to get along with your peers, as well as your supervisor, as well as external stakeholders. So again, as we become more and more a populist society, it's really important to get to know and build relationships with other people, many of whom you disagree, but hopefully you will find areas of commonality that you can move forward.
So what other kinds of advice would you give to women who are building their careers, both in terms of general career advice, but also particularly as women? And one thing we haven't talked about are mentors. It sounds to me, reading between the lines, that your parents were very much your mentors. Did you also have professional mentors? And is that something that one should look for as one builds one's career?
I'm asked that a lot, and I didn't have any mentors because we weren't important enough for anyone to pay attention to us, number one. Number two, we were so disconnected with mainstream America. We didn't know anybody. So for example, I wanted to go to Harvard. What Asian American kid does not want to go to Harvard? But we didn't even know anybody who went to Harvard, so that I can ask questions about what the application process is like. So I remember my father just scouring all his networks and finding people who would be related to people who would be related to people who would know somebody who went to Harvard. And we finally found one. And he was very helpful. He told us about the application process, gave us hints. But I remember how hard it was to find someone that we knew that we can talk to about Harvard. Now, we didn't know, of course, that we could have just called up Harvard and said, you know, I'm interested in applying for Harvard. I'd like to talk to a student recruiter. When you're out of mainstream society, you don't know those things. You don't know that those resources are available. And in America, there's so many of these kinds of resources. So no, I didn't have any mentors. My parents were my mentors. They could not teach us exactly what opportunities were available, but they gave us a very valuable tool and key. And that was to develop a sense of curiosity, to expand our horizons beyond our small immigrant community. And they would say, the world is so much bigger than just our little community. And it's your responsibility to go out and find those opportunities in a responsible way. Now, they were people of faith, they're Protestants. So they said, each one of you has been endowed by God to have special talents, and you have to find out what your talent is. So armed with that, you know, we were very curious about the outside world. And I think that curiosity helped us because we learned to teach ourselves. We observed, we listened. And just by observing and listening, you can learn so much. So for example, I never went home. I never had lunch in school. I always went home. So when I went to college for the first time, we had what's called gracious living. And we had dinner that had servers, that had this beautiful array, you know, of tables and flowers. But in front of each setting was this almost surgical array of utensils. Now, I had no idea which fork to use, which knife to use, what soup spoon to use. And so what do? You know, I was very shy and very quiet. And I didn't want to blurt out and said, you know, what do I do? So you just kind of hold back a little bit, stay cool, and then you just observe and you watch very carefully what is going on. And you see how the other women picked up which, you know, soup spoon, which comes at the beginning of a meal in American cuisine. In Chinese style, the soup comes at the end. So if you ever are served soup in a Chinese banquet, that is the last meal. Or noodles or rice, that's the last meal. But you know, so I didn't know that. So you watch. And so I learned to teach myself, which was very valuable. So that was the part about mentorship. So if you don't have a mentor, I would say, don't be discouraged. I would also say, if I had looked for mentors when I was growing up, my mentors would have not been able to take me this long path on which I embarked, because they can only take me as far as they went. And I have come so far beyond the people that I knew in my community. Now, Sarah, you mentioned the first part of that question was what?
Well, what would you advise women who are climbing a career, who want to
Oh,
have?
yeah, that's very important.
So I'm hearing observation, self-reliance, hard work.
And then you have to leave sometimes. You have to leave. You have to take risks and you have to leave. Now, I don't know how this would apply in other countries. So you have to think for yourself as to, you know, how what I'm saying would apply in your case. So for example, I was working for a company that was very male-oriented. They were full of engineers. And as much as I found the work interesting, I knew that I was not going to progress very far because number one, I'm not an engineer. And number two, I am not patient enough to climb, you know, the ladder of promotions over 30 years at this old stodgy company. So I decided it's not for me. And so I left. And there are other times when I have worked for bosses, only one other one, maybe two, that were not very nice to me. And I thought that I tried my best and it didn't work. And so I decided I had to leave. So I looked for other ways to leave. So I think it's important for young women to have tenacity and stamina and perseverance, and not think that there's discrimination around every corner. But after a certain point, if you've really tried and the organization is not welcoming, then you have to pull the plug, and you have to be brave enough to do that. I would counsel that you not leave until you have another alternative. Don't leave a job without going into another job. It's important that you find a new job and then you can leave. And if you do leave, you should do so gracefully, because you never want to burn any bridges. You never know when you might need that bridge again. And then aside from that, I would say to young men and women who are starting out, find something that you're really, really interested in. Never give up, and have confidence in yourself. And if it doesn't work, try again. This world is full of opportunities. And I speak as someone who was so afraid that if I ever blew a chance, I would never have another opportunity again. Because in the old world, that was what it was like. You had so few chances. And if you lost this opportunity, you would never have another chance again. That's how I thought. And I would agonize for months afterwards, berating myself because I didn't do something right. And I thought I lost that opportunity forever. So and that was a place where I came, where I was so desperate for opportunities. And I was so unforgiving of myself. And I'm still very tough on myself. But I think if I had to advise young people, I said, have confidence in yourself, work hard, be patient, and just never give up.
So I have one final question. Talk about what it means to have a career in public service, in government and in not-for-profits. Would you separate that from the private sector? What would you advise young women who are trying to create a vibrant democracy in their own countries?
I think number one, you have to believe in what you are doing. And when you are a pioneer, it's hard. And it's helpful if you can seek out like-minded people who can reinforce and support you in what you do. The inexorable trend for our world is democratic reform. Our world is becoming more populist, as I mentioned. And part of that populism may not always lead to democracy, but a lot of times it does. And so I think it's important to believe in what you are doing, because it's hard. Whenever you want to do something different, it's hard. What I found to be helpful in my life is that I was always curious. Remember, I'm new to America. I don't understand so much of what's happening in America. So I tried lots of different things. So I tried my work as a banker in the private sector. Then I was interested in government because I'm in this country that I don't understand. So I went into the White House. Then I went into the nonprofit sector as being recruited as head of United Way. And I think all those diverse experiences helped me to understand more holistically how America functions. And it gave me valuable insights on how to be a more effective leader, and in understanding how to bring people together from the various sectors, because the sectors speak very different languages. They have very different cultures. As an example, in the for-profit private world, private sector, time is money. So when you have a meeting, you try to keep it tight, you keep it to the point. And When it's over, everybody goes and does their work. It's very organized, ideally. Now, that may seem very cold-hearted to someone in the nonprofit sector, where they want to build trust and they want to get to know you. So when meeting was to take 3 to 4 hours, literally 3 to 4 hours, in which case we would start out the program with the meeting, with half an hour of introductions. Everybody goes around the room, introduce themselves, tell us what they think, what they did over the weekend, what goal they wanted to get out of this meeting. That's half an hour, it's gone. And then, everybody has to speak up. Everybody has a right to opine and make a point. And so those meetings took a long time because they had a much more diverse group of people trying to understand each other, make friends with one another, build trust. Whereas for the private sector, the bottom line is the coalescing factor. Time is money. We got this goal. We got to do this program. Let's get going. So those two sectors were very different. If they were to come together, as many times they must, to work on some big social issues facing the country, you needed the for-profit sector, you needed the nonprofit sector, you needed the government sector. And so how to bring them together in a way that was productive. And, for the nonprofit sector, once again, also, they saw time as currency. So they saw that, they viewed that if you cared about this issue, you would spend time with them on this issue, which is exactly opposite of what the for-profit sector was focused on. And when I was starting out, the language was even different. The for-profit sector would talk about passion, and collaboration. Well, to the private sector at that time, 30 years ago, passion, they never used that word. That was a word that meant a loss of control, too emotional. And when they talk about collaboration, that was like, during wartime, you had collaborators who collaborated with the enemy. So the language was even different. But of course, over time, now passion is a word in all sectors. So we all learn from each other and change. So understanding different sectors and how different organizations work was very important. And also, I'll say one other thing. If you are leading an organization or you're going into a new organization, you must understand the culture of that organization. Each organization has sacred cows that newcomers must understand and be respectful of. And a lot of times, the taboo things that cannot be touched are never told to you. So it's important to have a Sherpa, to someone to kind of tell you about the organization. And also it's very important to have an internal or an antenna to kind of be sensitive enough to know what is changeable, what is not, what is in the short term, achievable, what would take a much longer term plan. So all of that is part of understanding oneself as a change agent. And then constantly, you've got to push, because the status quo does not change without just pushing every single day.
Well, Secretary Chao, thank you for all the pushing you have done for this country and for the world. And thank you for giving us your time and your incredible insights. I know I've learned a lot, and I know that I am delighted to have you as a colleague at the Hudson Institute. And speaking for women around the world, thank you for sharing your time.
Thanks for having me. Join you wherever you are. Good luck. Godspeed.